So today we're looking at the book of Ezra, and like I said before, Ezra ties into Second Chronicles. You'll find that the last two verses of the book of Second Chronicles are the same as the first 2.5 verses of the book of Ezra. So we see this connecting of the dots, and it almost has the same feel, like it's the same author or group of authors who are chronicling this, and now they're just moving forward. So it also gives you the idea that these chroniclers were after the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, so they could have been anywhere. The book of Chronicles can be anywhere from 400, 500 BC, which is really close to the time of Christ. So he has that Darius Persia. It was his idea, led by God, by the Jehovah God. And remember, they had the prophecies of Jeremiah saying this is only going to be for 70 years. So it's not something, you're not going to be there forever. This is going to be God punishing you, God's wrath pouring down, that you owe him for the Sabbaths that you didn't take, you stole from him. Even the book of Malachi will talk about you've stolen from me, you've stolen tithes. Now this is not this isn't a forward-thinking, prove me kind of scripture. It's an afterthought. You've stolen my tithes, pay back my tithes, pay back what you owe me. See, that's why tithing really doesn't work for Christians, because we erroneous think if we tithe, we'll get more from God. No, our obedience is not tied to his blessings, which is a good thing. Our obedience might be tied to temporal things. Sometimes obedience will take you down the peg. Sometimes it'll keep you from promotion. Sometimes it'll keep you down. Sometimes it'll create hardships when you're having to invest in God and not invest in yourself. So we see that there's a different idea, that you have stolen my tithes, pay back my tithes, and look to me, and I'm the one that will open the windows of heaven. It isn't that tithing opens the windows, it's that when you are obedient by doing what you're supposed to do. I am a window opener anyway, but the windows don't open if you're not being obedient. You don't tie the cleaning of a child's room to their allowance. You don't want to. You want their allowance to be something that you're giving freely to them, but they do have obligations to the household. So it's a little more like that. We're not buying him, or he looks down and go, oh, you gave 10%, now I'm going to open the windows. The windows are already open. He's opening the windows all the time. We just need to jump in our roles and our responsibilities. So here we have Ezra, that it wasn't any Levite, and it wasn't fasting, it wasn't revival. It was God working behind the scenes to get Cyrus the king to move on the behalf of Judah. And he does. And he calls that anyone who wants to go back can go. And later on we find out that he even kind of bankrolls it. He even tells them to go and get that the people around them will give to them so that they may go and set up this temple. I'm leapfrogging over a little bit to chapter 6 to give you another little bit of insight. In chapter 6 it says here that he tells them to do this, and the king even gives it from his household, that they may offer sacrifices of sweet savors unto the God of heaven, and pray for the life of the king and his sons. See, this isn't just some altruistic praying to God. He actually has a non-altruistic praying to God. What he's done is, this is so that it may go well for the life of the king and his sons. So the idea here is, okay, he has some altruism here. He has some, something that he wants. But hey, how many of us come to Jesus and we want eternal life, and we want him to make us a better husband or a better leader? We always have something to get from it, which is nothing wrong with that. Motivation. His motivation is that they would send up sweet savor, that this God would give favor to the king and his sons. Now, I don't think he's a believer in a religious sense. It's very possible he saw Jehovah as the God of all the gods, the most great and powerful of the gods. It's very possible they haven't let go of their pantheistic view. But hey, he was recognizing him as Elohim, the creator, the sustainer, the one above them all. And I want to make sure that the Israelites, the Judahites, would go and appease this God and send up sweet savors so that the life of the king and his sons are looked after. Nothing wrong with that. So God moves in Cyrus. He sends all this back. We have a list of all the people that go in chapter 2, and I mentioned Yeshua. We have Zerubbabel and Yeshua I mentioned almost consecutively together. We always talk about Zerubbabel. We hardly ever talk about Yeshua. that there was a man named Yeshua was there with the reestablishing of the temple and of Jerusalem. You'll see them together many times. You got all these children going down. We said that was over 42,000, close to 50,000 people when it's all said and done. They on the 7th month they'd come in. This was on Tishri, and they first day of the year, of the Jewish year, and they started doing burnt offerings. They did what they could with the Levites they had and how they had the structure set up, and they went ahead and did the 3 fall feast, and they did the Feast of Tabernacles, and people gave willingly to it, and they gave money for the masons, and King Cyrus was behind them, and they set up with the Levites and set up the courses, and they sang. They had the psalmists were there singing the Psalms of Asaph and of David, and they did a very large, proper Passover for the first time in over 70 years, probably since the time of Josiah. They probably had never had a Passover at all since Josiah. That's a long time. And so we see also that there were people there who had seen the first temple, and they were crying because they remembered how good it used to be. And you got the people shouting with joy because of the foundation is laid and how good it's going to be. And so we see that kind of in Christianity too, is people that have seen how Christianity used to be, but people that are excited about what Christianity is doing. And yet we're not talking about progressivism. If anything, the newer Jews are still going to follow the older ways. They're going to build this exactly like it needs to be built. They're going to make the structure the way it's going to be. I don't know if they're going to have the Ark of the Covenant to do that. We don't see that come back into play. We do see that all the other things are set up, the Aaronic priesthoods and the sons of Aaron and the Levites and all the brazen labels and the washings and the ceremonialisms and the burnt offerings. All this comes back in. But in 4, we see that their adversaries are now coming out, and they're coming out against Zerubbabel and Yeshua, and they write letters back to Babylon, and they're protesting the building of this city and the building of this people. And it's funny how it's in the reign of Artaxerxes that they're writing all of these letters. And when they write these letters, they're just not writing them to the king, they write them to all the surrounding governors. You know, when you write a letter, it just went out to everybody to make their case. They write it to Artaxerxes, and they're having them look into the history to say, hey, you don't want these people to build this up because they are rebellious people. They are into sedition, and it goes and says that they are a bad city. Let it be known unto the king that the Jews that came out from thee have come into Jerusalem, building the rebellious and the bad city, and will set up the walls. They make the point as once they set this up, they're not going to be paying tribute. They're going to rebel against you, and there's all these problems. Let a search be made in the book of the records of the fathers, that you may find out the book of the records and see that the city is a rebellious city. So they're going back to selectively use history against the Jews. Selectively go against, because what their enemies are saying are actually kind of true. We see this is a rebellious city. It was a highly sinful city. They even make the point that, that this happened because they went away from their God. The rebellious city is certified to the king that if the city is built again, the walls will be set up, and it's like they won't pay tribute. They're not going to pay any kind of tithe. They're not going to obey your laws. You don't want the city to happen. So the king made a search and found out, yes, that form of their history was correct. Yes, they were a seditious city. Yes, they did rebel. Yes, they had all these problems. And so he called for the stopping of the building so he can research this even more. So Artaxerxes here is researching even more to see what these previous kings had said. So now the Jews are in a little bit of a bind. They're in the land, they're working on the city, they've already established a very rudimentary form of worship that's still acceptable to God. And so they went, and this is supposedly halted. Take heed now that you fail not to do this. Why would damage grow to the hurt of the kings? They're saying that we're doing this because we're looking out for you. They're really pushing the narrative here. Not only are they selectively going through history, but they're pushing the narrative like, hey, we're loyal to the king. these people aren't going to be loyal. You don't want them to set it up. So the king calls for the ceasing of the house of the work of the Lord at Jerusalem. And so it ceased until the 2nd year of the reign of Darius. Now the interesting thing here is that we see that the prophets Haggai and Zechariah, some name dropping there from some of the minor prophets, they came and talked with Zerubbabel and Yeshua, and they decided, and this is a very dangerous thing, to go ahead and continue the work. Now they know that the king who allowed them to come here and even had the Babylonians give them goods and give them stuff and give them gold and give them silver, but this is going to look like they're being rebellious. This is going to look like they're the seditious people that their enemies, their adversaries have said they are. But God has told them to move forward. So this is a very dangerous, faith-driven gamble on the part of Zerubbabel and Yeshua, because they could have found themselves with another army marching around them, and this time they would not have walls to protect them. They would be easy prey. They could get wiped out in a heartbeat. But they move forward. And then the enemies come, and they're saying, who commanded you to build this house? And who are their names? So they're really wanting to finger point, and they want to take some names back too. Who's the guy running this show, so we can, we're going to go tell the king and all the governors that who's leading this seditious act against the king. And they say, but the eyes of God was upon the elders of the Jews, and they didn't cause to cease. And a copy, and it's interesting, when you see this letter through the rest of 5, it almost makes the point for the Jews. When the enemies get so riled up, so they say, unto Darius the king, all peace. They're really starting to get a little smoozy here. Be it known to the king that we went unto the province of Judea and the house of the great God that was built there. And we asked the elders, who's doing this? And so that we might write their names and we might tell them. And they said, we are the servants of the God of heaven and earth, and build this house that was built. So this letter has been giving out. But this letter, I misspoke there. This letter in 7 is not the letter of the enemies. It is the letter of the pro people. I misspoke that. The Jews that are pro are now getting on board. They're realizing that the enemies are trying to write these letters, so they write a letter. And they write a letter to the governor of that area. Sorry, I misspoke here. When I look up, sometimes I forget where I'm at. They're writing a letter to the governor of that area, who is under the king. And they're writing this saying that we have been told to come here and we've been allowed to be here. And these enemies have come and said, who commanded you to build this wall? And they ask for their names. And we answered, saying, we are the servants of God of heaven, and build this house. But after our fathers had provoked God of heaven unto wrath, he gave them into the hands of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, the Chaldean, who destroyed this house and carried the people away to Babylon. These writers here that are writing this letter to this governor, which is supposed to make its way up the chain, is giving a little Bible study, a little history lesson of why they're doing what they're doing. They're not attacking their enemies. They're just standing for what they're supposed to be doing and why they're doing it. This is very interesting strategy. Like I said before, when you look at 4 or 5, you see that they have their enemies attacking, but they're not attacking their enemies back. Their enemies are writing letters to stop, and instead of them fighting, with them, they write letters back, and they're writing to the governor, appealing because of their history, because of the sins of their people, that God has wanted this to be put back together. So after our fathers had provoked the God of heaven unto wrath, he carried them away and destroyed all this house. But in the 1st year of Cyrus, the king of Babylon, the same Cyrus made a decree. So they're using the history again, this current history, relatively speaking, to go for them in writing that Cyrus has written these things. And the golden vessels of silver and gold out of the house of God that Nebuchadnezzar had took out of the temple that was in Jerusalem, they have brought back. And they write this to Sheshbazzar, who was the governor. And he told them what Cyrus had said. So now they're using this legal strategy. It's on their side now. And so Cyrus said, take these vessels, go and carry them to the temple that's Jerusalem, and let the house of God be established. And so this decree came from Cyrus. So they're going to Darius and saying, hey, Cyrus was behind this. And so they're appealing to the king. And Darius went and made a decree to search out. And he found where this was all true. He found where the Jews were not lying. Cyrus had made this decree. We see this in 6, talking about let these houses be built and the places thereof to offer sacrifices, and let the foundations be strongly laid. The height thereof is, 60 cubits by 60 cubits. So he's telling them about the rows, and let the expenses come from the king's house. So it'll be the king also who's making these expenses. And let the gold and silver of the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar had taken forth, be taken back. Therefore, Tatian the governor beyond the river, and your companions that are, go hence, and let the work of God alone, let the governor of the Jews and the elders build the house of God. So Darius is on the side of the Jews here, and this is very good. So we see, and again, we're moving down through here. He makes this decree, and that anything that they're going to need, both of young bullocks and rams and lambs and offerings for the God of heaven, wheat and salt and wine and oil according to the appointment of the priest. And again, we see here in 10 where he says that they may offer sacrifices of sweet savor unto the God of heaven and pray for the life of the king and his sons. There you go. And he also made a decree, I love the rest of this. He makes a decree that whosoever shall alter this word, let their timbers be pulled down from the house, and let him be hanged thereof, and let his house become a dunghill. He double downs there. If any man changes any of these words, we're going to destroy your house, hang you on it, what's left, and then turn it into a dunghill. Tatia the governor then moved speedily. You think you wouldn't? And the elders of the Jews built, and they prospered through the prophesying of Haggai and Zechariah the son of Iddo, and they built and finished it according to the command of Cyrus, Darius, and Artaxerxes. They had 3 kings. Three kings of Orient. They had 3 kings on their side for the building of this. And the house was finished in the month of Adar, in the 6th year of the reign of Darius. And the children of Israel, and the priests, and the Levites, and the rest of the children of captivity held the dedication of the house with joy. And they dedicated the house with 100 bullocks, and you get all this dedication going on. And they set up the priest in accordance to that was written with Moses. And the children of the captivity kept the Passover on the 14th day of the first month. And they had this wonderful Passover. They even kept unleavened bread with joy. And it says here, I love this, what it says, and they kept the feast of unleavened bread 7 days with joy, for the Lord had made them joyful, and turned the heart of the king of Assyria to them, to strengthen their hands. He didn't turn his heart in turning his will. His will was already to do it. He just strengthened that heart. See, that's another thing to be saying. He doesn't turn hearts, and I'm going to turn you from bad to good. No, he took the good hearts of these 3 kings and motivated those hearts to more. Now, God is a motivator. I will give that. We talk about the wooing of the Holy Spirit, the leadership of the Holy Spirit. We talk about all these things, following the Word, following Jesus, all these things that are good. God won't turn your heart to him. That's your job. Once you turn, he will work with you. He will woo you. He will chasten you. But he will love you. He will lead you. And that's what he's doing here. These 3 kings had a softened heart, and maybe because of what we're going to find out in the book of David, what Nebuchadnezzar went through. There's a big hole in the history here, which David fulfills, and where we find out more about this king Nebuchadnezzar and how God works with him. And that's where they get the idea, I think, that this is the mighty God of heaven. When Nebuchadnezzar, and we'll get to that later, he thinks he's so big and bad, and God gives him the mind of an animal, and he has to root around for 7 years with this mind of an animal. You learn humility. You learn who's really running the show. And these guys were afraid, but they were awestruck, and they wanted this God's favor. Whether they sought him for any kind of personal salvation or forgiveness of sins, they did want his favors and prayers of the priest to go for the king and his sons. We see this establishment. There's so much joy here, and we don't see a downside coming. Really, we don't. From here on out, things seem to move pretty well. And the history, like I said, in Josephus just is this. It's like it's just waiting for something to happen. There isn't a lot of turmoil. There's not a lot of sin. We don't see any kings here. They're just leaders and kind of governorships that move back and forth. It's like they're waiting for someone to come along and take the reins. I wonder who that could be. Anyway, we're finishing this with joy. that God had turned the heart of the king. And like I said, do not get lost in any kind of election, because we don't see any election from him. I've done this much of the Bible, and we see free will, we see moving in hearts, we see turning around. All of the wrath that came because, and again we see that in Isaiah where he says, what more could I have done for my vineyard? That's a very tough thing. That's kind of one of those deep grounding things that tells you, what more could I have done? If God could have changed their hearts, don't think he'd have done it then? Oh, he wants to show his glory by giving wrath. That's conclusionary Christianity. That's not evidentiary Christianity. We don't see where God throws you down just to show you what a great God he is for picking you up. He is a great God because he chooses to pick us up. That we throw ourselves down, and he could have left us there, but he chooses to pick us up, and that also shows that he is a great God. Thank you.